He called her pregnancy a lie and blocked her everywhere. 5 years later, a little girl with his eyes and failing vision made him face the truth. Adam Clark had always believed that control was the same as clarity. If something didn't fit into the structure he trusted, he dismissed it as noise, as manipulation, as a distraction from the order he had built his life upon. That belief had carried him through boardrooms, negotiations, and hostile takeovers, shaping him into a man others admired and feared in equal measure. It was that same belief that made him laugh when Emily Rose stood in front of him that evening, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke a single word that changed everything for her and meant nothing to him at the time. Pregnant. The word hung in the air between them, fragile and exposed. Adam leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms slowly, studying her the way he would have failed proposal. Emily looked exhausted, her dark hair pulled back too tightly, her blue eyes too honest for a lie she hadn't rehearsed. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't crying. That, more than anything, irritated him. "You expect me to believe this?" he asked, a thin smile forming at the corner of his mouth. "After everything, this is what you come up with?" Emily swallowed, forcing herself to remain steady. "I'm not coming up with anything," she said quietly. "I took the test. I went to the doctor. I'm telling you because you deserve to know." Adam shook his head, already standing, pacing toward the window of his office as if the conversation were a nuisance he needed to walk off. Outside, the city glowed with evening lights, obedient and predictable. Inside, something messy had intruded. "This is exactly how people trap men like me," he said without turning around. "Fear, guilt, obligation. I've seen it too many times." "I'm not asking you for money," Emily replied, her voice barely louder than a breath. "I'm not asking you for anything. I just thought you should know." That made him turn. His blue eyes were cold now, sharpened by certainty. "That's the lie," he said. "You don't say it directly, but that's the point. You want something. Everyone does." Emily felt something inside her crack, not loudly, but deeply. She had imagined many reactions in the weeks leading up to this moment. Shock. Silence. Even anger. What she hadn't imagined was being reduced to a stereotype so quickly, so completely, without a single question asked. "I loved you," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I wouldn't do this." Adam laughed again, shorter this time, without humor. "Love doesn't make people honest. It makes them desperate." The room felt suddenly too small. Emily realized then that no amount of truth would matter if he had already decided who she was. She took a step back, her hand instinctively resting on her stomach, a gesture Adam noticed and misinterpreted immediately. "Don't," he snapped. "Don't start acting." That was the moment she understood there was nothing left to say. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply nodded once, accepting a verdict she had never been allowed to defend herself against. When she turned to leave, Adam was already on his phone, his attention shifting away from her as if she were a closed file. By the time Emily reached the elevator, her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She pressed her forehead against the cool metal wall as it descended, breathing through the panic rising in her chest. She told herself she would be strong. She told herself she didn't need him. She told herself many things that felt untrue but necessary. That night, Adam blocked her number. Then her email. Then every possible channel where her name might appear. He erased her efficiently, methodically, convinced that he had just avoided a costly mistake. He went to bed believing he had won. He had no idea that in doing so, he had just walked away from the most important truth of his life, one that would wait quietly for 5 years before demanding to be seen. The weeks that followed unfolded slowly, each day stretching longer than the one before, as if time itself had decided to test Emily's resolve. The silence Adam left behind was absolute. No messages slipped through by accident, no missed calls appeared, no unanswered questions lingered on the edge of hope. He had erased her completely, and that finality forced her to confront a future she had never planned to face alone. Morning sickness came in relentless waves, often catching her on crowded buses or in the narrow bathroom of her small apartment, where she learned to brace herself against the sink and breathe until the dizziness passed. She kept working, even when her body begged for rest, because stopping felt dangerous. Work meant routine, and routine kept fear from taking over entirely. At night, when the city quieted and there was no one to perform strength for, she allowed herself to sit on the edge of her bed and cry softly, one hand resting on her stomach, whispering apologies to a life that had not asked to begin under such circumstances. The first doctor's appointment confirmed what she already knew but had not yet fully accepted. The pregnancy was real, healthy, and moving forward with or without Adam's belief. Hearing the heartbeat for the first time broke something open inside her, not into despair, but into fierce determination. That sound anchored her, made the situation tangible in a way words never could. Whatever happened next, she was no longer alone in the world. As months passed, her body changed, and with it came a new kind of awareness. Strangers offered seats on public transport. Co-workers asked polite questions she learned to answer vaguely. She avoided conversations about fathers and families, not out of shame, but because explaining felt exhausting. Every explanation carried the risk of reopening wounds she was trying to keep stitched together. Emily downsized her life without ceremony. She moved into a smaller apartment closer to work, sold things she no longer needed, learned to budget with precision. She became intimately familiar with numbers, schedules, and limits, and in that process, she discovered a strength she hadn't known she possessed. It wasn't the loud kind. It was quiet, persistent, and unwavering. The birth came on a rainy night, after hours of labor that left her shaking and disoriented. When she finally held her daughter, everything else receded into the background. The world narrowed to the warmth of a tiny body against her chest, to pale blonde hair damp with sweat, to a pair of blue eyes that opened briefly before closing again. Emily named her Lily, the name arriving naturally, as if it had always been waiting. Those first months were the hardest. Sleep became fragmented, days blurred together, and exhaustion settled into her bones. She learned to function on instinct, responding to Lily's cries with automatic tenderness even when her own energy was depleted. There were moments when fear crept in quietly, late at night, whispering questions about the future, about money, about whether love would be enough. Each time, Emily pushed back, reminding herself that love was the only thing that had never failed her. As Lily grew, Emily noticed small things that filled her with wonder and ache in equal measure. The way Lily's eyes followed light. The way she reached for familiar sounds. The way her smile appeared suddenly, without warning, and erased entire days of worry. Those moments made the absence of Adam feel heavier, not because Emily wanted him back, but because Lily deserved answers she could not yet give. She never tried to contact him again. Not out of pride, but out of acceptance. She understood now that belief could not be forced, and neither could responsibility. If Adam ever reappeared, it would have to be because he chose to see the truth on his own. Until then, Emily built a life defined not by abandonment, but by resilience. She learned to be both mother and anchor, both softness and strength. And in the quiet rhythm of caring for her daughter, she began to believe that even without the man who had walked away, she and Lily would be enough. The first signs that something was wrong arrived so quietly that Emily almost dismissed them as imagination. Lily was barely 2 when Emily noticed how close she held books to her face, how she tilted her head slightly when trying to focus on pictures, how she hesitated on playground steps that other children ran up without fear. At first, Emily told herself it was just caution, just a sensitive child learning the world at her own pace. Mothers learned not to panic at every difference. But the doubts grew. At daycare, a teacher gently mentioned that Lily often missed visual cues during group activities, that she struggled to recognize shapes from a distance. Emily smiled, thanked her, and carried the concern home like a weight she pretended not to feel. That night, she watched Lily play on the floor, carefully stacking blocks inches from her face, her small fingers moving with intense concentration. The sight filled Emily with a cold, creeping fear she could no longer ignore. The first ophthalmologist appointment came quickly after that. The clinic smelled of disinfectant and quiet worry, the walls lined with cheerful posters that felt almost cruel in their optimism. Lily sat on Emily's lap, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, her large blue eyes blinking behind temporary test lenses. She didn't cry. She trusted completely, and that trust hurt more than tears ever could. The doctor was kind, careful with his words, but the concern in his expression was unmistakable. "We need more tests," he said gently. "This isn't something we should ignore." More tests led to more appointments, more specialists, more waiting rooms where Emily learned to read bad news in the pauses between sentences. Each visit chipped away at denial until there was none left to cling to. Finally, the words were spoken clearly, without softening. Lily had a progressive condition affecting her eyesight. Without surgery, her vision would continue to deteriorate. Emily felt the world narrow to a single, suffocating point. She nodded, asked questions, took notes, all while a roaring filled her ears, drowning out everything else. The cost of the operation was explained next, and the numbers felt unreal, disconnected from reality, like figures from someone else's life. She knew immediately that no amount of budgeting or overtime would be enough. At home, Emily sat on the floor beside Lily's bed long after she had fallen asleep. She watched her daughter's chest rise and fall, memorizing every detail of her face as if afraid that memory alone might not be enough one day. The fear that had once been abstract now became sharp and constant, a presence she carried with her everywhere. Lily began wearing glasses shortly after her 3rd birthday. They were too big for her face, sliding down her nose no matter how often Emily adjusted them. Lily hated them at first, pushing them away in frustration, asking why other children didn't need them. Emily explained as simply as she could, turning it into a story about special eyes and extra help, smiling until her cheeks ached. "Mama," Lily asked one evening as Emily tucked her into bed, "will I always be able to see you?" The question landed without warning. Emily swallowed hard, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Yes," she said softly. "I'll always be right here." She turned away quickly after switching off the light, tears blurring her vision as she leaned against the hallway wall. It wasn't the question itself that broke her, but the knowledge that she didn't truly know the answer. Love did not guarantee outcomes. It only guaranteed effort. Emily worked harder than ever. She took on extra shifts, freelance projects, anything that paid even a little more. She sold furniture, jewelry, pieces of her old life she had once imagined passing down. Every dollar went into a separate account marked only by a single word: surgery. The balance grew painfully slowly. There were nights when exhaustion overtook her completely, when she sat at the kitchen table staring at unpaid bills and medical estimates, her hands trembling with the urge to scream. In those moments, anger finally surfaced, not loud or explosive, but quiet and corrosive. Not at fate. Not at doctors. At the man who had laughed and walked away, who had decided a truth was a lie and left her to face consequences he would never see. And yet, even then, she did not reach for her phone. She had learned that some doors, once closed, could not be forced open without breaking what stood behind them. Lily needed calm, not chaos. Stability, not resentment. So Emily swallowed the anger and turned it into action, into planning, into relentless forward motion. By the time Lily turned 5, Emily knew one thing with painful clarity. Time was no longer on their side. The surgery could not wait forever, and neither could hope alone. Somewhere deep inside her, a thought she had buried for years began to stir, unwelcome and terrifying. Sooner or later, the truth would surface. And when it did, it would change everything. The clinic felt colder than Adam expected, despite its spotless floors and warm lighting designed to reassure donors and patients alike. He had walked through hospitals before as part of charity initiatives, smiling for cameras, shaking hands, listening to carefully prepared summaries about lives improved by funding. That morning was no different in intention, yet everything inside him felt unsettled, as though something invisible had shifted before he even stepped through the doors. He reviewed documents on his tablet as he moved down the corridor, barely registering the names of departments or the muted sounds of footsteps around him. His mind was focused on efficiency, on schedules, on the next meeting waiting on his calendar. He did not expect memory to ambush him. Then he saw her. Emily stood near the reception desk, her dark hair loosely tied back, one hand resting protectively on the shoulder of a small girl beside her. The child wore oversized glasses that slid slightly down her nose as she laughed at something her mother whispered. There was a softness in Emily's posture that stopped Adam mid-step, a familiarity so sharp it felt like a physical blow. For a second, he told himself it couldn't be her. 5 years was a long time. Faces changed. People moved on. But then Emily turned her head, and there was no doubt left to cling to. Those same blue eyes met his briefly before widening in recognition, and Adam felt the world tilt. The child turned with her. Adam's breath caught painfully in his chest. The girl's blonde hair caught the light, her face small and serious as she studied him through thick lenses. But it was her eyes that froze him in place. Blue. Unmistakably blue. Not just similar, but identical to his own, the same clear shade that stared back at him from mirrors every morning. Time slowed to a cruel crawl. Emily saw the moment recognition struck him and felt her body tense instinctively. She stepped slightly in front of her daughter, not to hide her, but to ground herself. She had imagined this encounter countless times in her darker moments, always pushing it away as unlikely, unnecessary, dangerous. She had not imagined it would happen here, of all places. "Lily," she said softly, placing a reassuring hand on the girl's back. "Go sit for a moment, okay?" The child hesitated, sensing the tension, then nodded and walked toward a nearby chair, swinging her legs gently as she waited. Emily turned back to Adam, her expression guarded but composed. "Emily," he said, her name unfamiliar on his tongue after so many years. His voice sounded distant even to himself. "What are you doing here?" She studied him briefly, as if deciding how much truth he deserved. "I have an appointment," she replied evenly. Adam glanced at the waiting area, at the children and parents scattered throughout, then back at Lily. The connection he had tried to deny began tightening its grip, forcing logic and memory into alignment. Dates. Ages. The night he had laughed and blocked her everywhere. His hands curled slowly into fists. "That's your daughter?" he asked, though the question felt almost ridiculous even as he spoke it. Emily didn't answer right away. She looked over at Lily, at the way the girl leaned forward to squint at a picture book, her glasses slipping again. When she spoke, her voice was calm, but there was something unyielding beneath it. "Yes," she said. "She's 5. Adam's pulse thundered in his ears. "And her father?" Emily met his gaze directly now. "You already know the answer." The weight of that sentence pressed down on him with suffocating force. He wanted to argue, to deny, to demand proof, but his body betrayed him first. His knees felt weak, his chest tight, the air suddenly difficult to draw in. This was not a trap. This was not manipulation. This was consequence. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly, the question stripped of accusation and filled instead with disbelief. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. "I tried," she said. "You decided I was lying. And then you made sure I couldn't reach you." Silence stretched between them, heavy and undeniable. Adam looked at Lily again, really looked at her this time. He noticed how carefully she moved, how she leaned forward to see, how she rubbed at her eyes with small, tired gestures. A chill ran through him. "What's wrong with her?" he asked, dread creeping into his voice. Emily hesitated. This was the moment she had sworn would never belong to him, the moment of vulnerability she had guarded fiercely. But the truth was already unraveling. "She needs surgery," she said quietly. "If we wait too long, she could lose her vision." The words hit him harder than any accusation ever could. Adam felt something inside him fracture completely. Not anger. Not pride. But the fragile illusion that he had walked away from a lie rather than a life. He stood there, surrounded by strangers, staring at the child he had never known, and for the first time in years, certainty abandoned him entirely. He had believed blocking the truth would make it disappear. Instead, it had been waiting for him. And now, there was no escape left. The hours after that encounter passed in a haze Adam had never experienced before. He left the clinic without completing the visit he had come for, walking past assistants who called his name, past donors who expected his attention, past a life that suddenly felt irrelevant. He sat in his car for a long time without turning the engine on, his hands resting on the steering wheel as if gripping it could keep the world from tilting further out of control. A daughter. The word echoed relentlessly, reshaping every memory he had tried to seal away. 5 years ago no longer felt distant. It felt immediate, raw, and unforgivably close. He replayed the moment Emily had stood in his office, the steadiness of her voice, the way he had dismissed her without a single question. The certainty he had once been so proud of now felt like a weapon he had turned on himself. He drove aimlessly, streets blurring together as his thoughts spiraled. He thought about Lily's glasses, too large for her face, the way she leaned forward to see. He thought about the word surgery and how calmly Emily had said it, as if she had already exhausted every other emotion before allowing fear to surface. That quiet strength unsettled him more than anger ever could have. By the time he returned home, night had fallen. The apartment lights came on automatically, revealing a space that suddenly felt hostile in its perfection. Everything was expensive. Everything was empty. Adam stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by silence, and felt something he had never truly known before: shame. He poured himself a drink and set it down untouched. His phone lay on the table beside it, heavy with possibility. For the first time in years, he unlocked the blocks he had placed so decisively, scrolling through old messages that stopped abruptly 5 years earlier. Emily's name sat there, waiting, unchanged. He didn't call. Not yet. Instead, he began to read. Medical articles. Clinical explanations. Progressive childhood vision loss. Surgical windows. Risks of waiting too long. Each paragraph tightened the knot in his chest. He understood numbers. He understood consequences. And the more he read, the clearer it became that time was the one thing Lily did not have. Sometime near dawn, Adam finally broke. He sat on the edge of his bed and pressed his palms to his face, breathing unevenly as the weight of reality settled fully onto his shoulders. Tears came without warning, hot and humiliating, streaking down a face that had not cried since he was a child. He cried not only for Lily, but for the years stolen from her, for birthdays missed, for first words he never heard, for fear she had carried without him. He cried because for the first time, there was no one else to blame. When the tears subsided, what remained was resolve, sharp and undeniable. This was not a problem he could delegate. Not a mistake he could apologize away. This was a life that demanded action, humility, and patience in equal measure. He called Emily the next morning. She didn't answer immediately. When she finally did, her voice was calm, guarded, unsurprised. "I'm not calling to argue," Adam said quietly. "And I'm not calling to make excuses." There was a pause on the line. "I want to help," he continued. "With the surgery. With anything. No conditions." Emily exhaled slowly. "This isn't about money," she replied. "It never was." "I know," Adam said. "But it's what I can do right now. And I need to do something." Another pause followed, longer this time. "She has an appointment next week," Emily said finally. "You're not obligated to come." "I want to," Adam answered immediately. "If you'll allow it." Emily did not promise anything. She did not soften. She simply said she would let him know. When the call ended, Adam sat motionless, staring at the phone as if it might disappear. He understood now that reappearing in their lives would not erase the past. Trust, if it ever came, would arrive slowly and without guarantees. But for the first time since the night he had laughed and walked away, Adam was no longer running from the truth. He was walking toward it. And whatever waited on the other side, he knew one thing with painful clarity. This time, he would not turn away. The appointment came sooner than Adam expected, and the days leading up to it passed with an unfamiliar slowness that left him restless and exhausted. He found it impossible to focus on work, canceling meetings without explanation and delegating decisions he would normally never release. For the first time in his career, control felt meaningless. There was nothing he could negotiate or command to make this easier. When he arrived at the clinic that morning, he waited outside longer than necessary, steadying his breath before going in. He did not want Lily to see tension in his face, even if she did not yet understand who he was to her. Emily arrived a few minutes later, holding Lily's hand, her movements calm and purposeful. She acknowledged Adam with a brief nod, neither warm nor cold, simply factual. Lily looked up at him with curiosity, her blue eyes magnified behind her glasses. "You're the man from before," she said matter-of-factly. Adam crouched slightly, careful not to invade her space. "Yes," he replied softly. "I'm Adam." She considered this, then smiled politely, as children often did when unsure how much attention to offer. Emily guided her toward the examination room, and Adam followed a step behind, acutely aware of his position on the edge of their world. The consultation was thorough and uncomfortably detailed. The surgeon explained the procedure, the risks, the narrow window in which the operation would be most effective. Adam listened closely, absorbing every word, every statistic, every consequence of delay. He watched Emily take notes, her expression composed but tight around the eyes, and understood that she had carried this burden alone for far too long. When the surgeon mentioned cost, Adam spoke without hesitation. "I'll take care of it," he said. His voice was firm, not performative. Emily turned to him slowly. "We'll discuss that later," she said quietly, reclaiming control of the moment. Lily swung her legs from the chair, oblivious to the gravity of the conversation. "Will it hurt?" she asked suddenly. The room went still. The surgeon answered gently, explaining in terms meant to reassure. Adam watched Lily's face carefully, noting the way her fingers tightened around Emily's hand. He reached out instinctively, then stopped himself, waiting for permission that might never come. After the appointment, they walked outside together. The air was crisp, sunlight catching on the edges of Lily's hair. Adam felt the urge to say something important, something that might bridge the distance between them, but every word felt inadequate. Lily solved the problem for him. "Do you know how to draw?" she asked. Adam blinked, startled. "Not very well," he admitted. "That's okay," she said seriously. "I'm still learning too." Something in his chest loosened at that simple acceptance. Over the next weeks, Adam began to see them more often, always on Emily's terms. Sometimes it was just a short walk after Lily's appointments, sometimes a quiet hour at a cafe where Lily colored while the adults spoke carefully around her. Adam learned to exist without demanding a role, to listen more than he spoke, to accept correction without defensiveness. Lily warmed to him slowly. She asked him questions about the world, about his job, about why buildings were so tall and why adults seemed so tired. Adam answered honestly, without exaggeration, discovering that honesty felt far less exhausting than performance. One afternoon, as they sat on a bench in a small park, Lily leaned against his arm without looking up. The contact was light, casual, unintentional. Adam didn't move. He barely breathed. The weight of that trust settled into him with quiet intensity. Emily noticed. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, Emily stood by the window while Adam waited near the door, unsure whether to leave or stay. "She's not afraid of you," Emily said finally. "That matters." "I'm afraid," Adam admitted. She turned to him, surprised by the honesty. "Of what?" "Of failing her," he said. "Of not being enough." Emily studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Good," she said. "That means you understand what's at stake." As Adam left that night, the city felt different. Not smaller, not softer, but more real. He understood now that being present was not about grand gestures or fixing everything at once. It was about consistency, humility, and accepting that trust would come only if he earned it day by day. And for the first time, that felt like a responsibility he was ready to carry. The surgery date was set, and from that moment on, time seemed to tighten around all of them. Every day carried a quiet urgency that no one said out loud, as if naming it might make it worse. Emily moved through her routines with even more precision than before, keeping Lily's days predictable and calm, while Adam adjusted his entire life around the fragile countdown without announcing the changes to anyone. He began arriving early, not because he was needed, but because he wanted Lily to see him before fear had a chance to settle in. Sometimes he brought simple things, a small coloring book, a new set of pencils, a story he had looked up online and practiced reading in advance so he wouldn't stumble over the words. Lily accepted these offerings without ceremony, more interested in the attention than the objects themselves. One afternoon, as they sat together in the hospital waiting area for pre-surgery tests, Lily leaned closer to him and whispered, "If I don't see well for a little while, will you still come?" The question was quiet, almost casual, but it cut through him with brutal clarity. "Yes," Adam said immediately, lowering his voice to match hers. "I'll be there before, and I'll be there after. I'm not going anywhere." She studied his face carefully, searching for something only children seemed able to see, then nodded and rested her head against his arm. Adam stayed perfectly still, aware that this was not a moment to fill with words. It was a moment to simply exist. Emily watched them from across the room, her heart tightening in a way that was both painful and unfamiliar. She had prepared herself to manage Lily's fear alone, as she always had, but seeing Adam there, steady and unassuming, shifted something inside her. It did not erase the past, but it softened its sharpest edges. The night before the surgery, Lily couldn't sleep. Emily sat beside her bed, stroking her hair, answering the same questions again and again with practiced calm. When Lily finally drifted off, Emily stepped into the kitchen and found Adam standing there, staring out the window as if the city lights might offer answers. "I don't know how to do this," Emily admitted quietly. "I've been strong for so long, but tonight I don't feel strong at all." Adam turned toward her slowly. "You don't have to be," he said. "Not alone." She hesitated, then nodded, allowing herself to lean against the counter as the weight of exhaustion finally caught up with her. For the first time in years, she let someone else stand close without bracing for disappointment. The morning of the surgery arrived too quickly. Lily was brave in the way only children could be, trusting and terrified all at once. Adam walked beside her as she was taken down the hallway, his hand holding hers until the last possible moment. When the doors closed behind her, something inside him broke open, leaving fear exposed and unguarded. The hours that followed were the longest of his life. Emily and Adam sat together in silence, occasionally exchanging small, grounding comments, neither daring to speculate or hope too loudly. When the surgeon finally appeared, removing his mask with a tired smile, Adam stood so quickly his chair nearly fell over. "The surgery went well," the doctor said. "We're optimistic." Emily covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now, while Adam felt his knees weaken with relief so intense it was almost painful. He didn't celebrate. He didn't speak. He simply closed his eyes and breathed for the first time in hours. When they were finally allowed to see Lily, she was groggy and pale, but alive and smiling faintly. "Hi," she murmured. Adam laughed softly through tears he didn't bother to hide. "Hi," he answered back. As they stood there together, watching Lily sleep again, Adam understood something with absolute clarity. This was no longer about redemption or fixing a mistake. It was about staying, even when fear threatened to undo him. And this time, he knew, staying was the only thing that mattered. Recovery did not happen overnight, and in that slowness there was both exhaustion and hope. The days after the surgery blurred together into a careful routine of medications, follow-up visits, and quiet rest. Lily wore a protective bandage over one eye, moving cautiously through familiar spaces as if rediscovering them piece by piece. Adam stayed nearby without hovering, learning how to be present without overwhelming, how to offer help without taking control. Emily watched him closely during those weeks, noticing details she could not ignore. He remembered medication schedules without reminders. He lowered his voice instinctively around Lily, as if sound itself might disturb her healing. He asked questions when he didn't understand, rather than pretending he did. It was not perfection that impressed her, but consistency, the kind that didn't fade when no one was watching. As Lily grew stronger, small moments began to surface that felt almost miraculous. One afternoon she stood by the window, squinting slightly, then laughed in surprise. "Mom," she said, pointing, "the leaves are moving." Emily's breath caught painfully in her chest. Adam stood behind them, frozen, watching the scene as if afraid to break it. That simple observation, so ordinary to most, felt like a victory hard-earned and fragile. Weeks later, at a follow-up appointment, the doctor confirmed what they had dared to hope. Lily's vision was stabilizing. With time and care, she would be able to see normally. The relief was overwhelming. Emily cried openly, no longer holding herself together through sheer will. Adam rested a hand on her shoulder, steady and supportive, asking nothing in return. For the first time, she did not pull away. Life began to widen again after that. Lily returned to school, proudly showing off her brave eye and explaining to classmates that doctors had fixed something very important. She drew pictures again, this time standing farther from the page, her lines more confident. Adam attended school meetings quietly, sitting in the back, listening, absorbing a role he was still learning how to fill. One evening, as Lily worked on a puzzle at the table, she looked up suddenly. "You're my dad," she said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. Adam's chest tightened. "If you want me to be," he replied carefully. "I do," she said simply, then returned to her puzzle as if nothing monumental had just occurred. Emily turned away, blinking rapidly, overcome by a rush of emotion she had no words for. She had prepared herself for many possible endings to this story, but not this quiet, unforced acceptance. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Emily and Adam sat together in the dim light of the living room. The city hummed softly outside, distant and unconcerned. "I was wrong about you," Emily said at last. Adam didn't rush to accept forgiveness he hadn't earned. "I was wrong first," he answered. "And worse." She nodded, acknowledging the truth of it without reopening old wounds. "I don't need promises," she said. "I need honesty. And presence." "You'll have both," Adam replied, his voice steady. "As long as you'll let me." They didn't define what they were becoming. They didn't rush toward labels or expectations. They allowed the future to unfold gradually, built not on fear or resentment, but on proof. Months later, Lily ran across the park toward Adam without hesitation, her laughter clear and confident. He caught her easily, lifting her into the air as Emily watched from a bench nearby. The scene felt ordinary, and that ordinariness was its greatest gift. Adam had once decided that pregnancy was a lie and erased the truth without hesitation. 5 years later, he understood that the greatest deception had been the one he told himself. And in choosing to stay, to see, and to believe, he found something he never knew he had been missing. A family.